This is Veronica. She was a 17-year-old Jersey cow and two-time champion winner at the World Dairy Expo in Madison, Wisconsin. Basically, a cow beauty queen. That's why her owners, George and Tony, called her Queen Veronica. She died in 2016, but her many sisters and daughters continue to live at George and Tony's farm in Litchfield, Connecticut. Theirs is a unique story in the dairy industry because it started as most dairies don't: designer shoes. By the early 2000s, HBO's hit show Sex and the City had propelled Manolo Blahnik shoes into the public consciousness. George Malkemus and Tony Yurgaitis, currently the president and vice president of Manolo Blahnik, had owned the North American license to the shoe brand since 1982, so they appreciated the boost. But even a few years before that, the pair were already looking to their next venture: a premier cow breeding farm. Tony and George are partners in both life and business. They met in 1977, and since 1988, they spent weekends at their country home in Litchfield, Connecticut. Part of the draw was a view of the land across the road. It had been a part of Litchfield since 1869 as a dairy farm called Arethusa, and George and Tony loved it. So when developers threatened to turn it into a golf course in 1996, they bought it.
We never really had to have a farm. We bought it selfishly to protect our view, and it became part of not only our home, but the community.
So they secured the view, but they didn't yet know what it would become. If premier cow breeding seems like an unlikely second act for top designer shoe executives from New York City, that's because it was.
We didn't know what we were getting into. Well, I'm glad I could throw this into the wash. And I think if we did, we would not get into it. So we were totally just saw the, positive picture. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're gonna let me go.
But George and Tony threw themselves into the dairy world all the same, learning about the dairy industry and attending breeding shows in the Midwest and Canada. At one show, they bought their first 5 cows.
And those 5 cows came in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They were blue ribbon, fantastic cows. So we thought, wow, we're learning and we're getting into this the right way.
It turns out, though, that the prettiest cows don't always produce the best calves. This was just one of many mistakes the budding farmers made in the early years. But they kept learning, breeding their own cows and selling their embryos, and eventually, their cows began winning titles of their own.
Throughout the years, we really became part of the dairy world. I think it was a real compliment when we went to one of the dairy shows. One of the judges came up to us and he said, "Oh my gosh, you're fitting right in."
Then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and the farm needed a new source of income. So their milk, like their shoes, went luxury. Milk, an unavoidable byproduct of cow ownership, was not an important part of George and Tony's early operation. They sold it for 88 cents a gallon to a commercial dairy, but that changed in 2008.
It was something that was supported 100% by Tony and me. That's when we decided to try to bottle our own milk.
The pair quickly discovered that milk production benefited from the same meticulousness they applied to the production of Manolo Blahnik shoes. They sampled milk from around the country and as far away as Italy. They experimented with different food and milking schedules for their cows. They pampered the cows, mucking stalls religiously, getting them outdoors, and shampooing their tails daily.
If a cow is happy, it's funny to say they give better milk. I think that's true.
They vat pasteurized the milk at 145 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, instead of the more common ultra-pasteurization method, which blasts the milk to 280 degrees for 2 seconds. Vat pasteurization is a more expensive process, and it severely cuts down on the milk's shelf life, but it also retains a richness of flavor uncommon in other milk. So Tony and George began bottling and selling that milk for $8 a gallon, more than 8 times what they got for it previously. This marked a new chapter for Arethusa. After they opened their own milk production plant, Arethusa expanded to making yogurt, ice cream, butter, and cheese. Like the cows themselves, many of these products started winning awards, so George and Tony kept going. From 2009 to today, their herd grew to over 350 cows, they added 11 new buildings at the farm, they introduced their products in Whole Foods, and they opened 1 restaurant and 2 ice cream stores. This is an unusual success in an industry whose main story has been suffering for the last 20 years. The number of dairy farms in the U.S. has dropped by over half since 2000, with Connecticut alone losing thousands since 1940. Prices for a gallon of milk have fallen by about 25% in the last decade, and Americans are increasingly rejecting milk in favor of non-dairy alternatives. Unlike other dairy farmers struggling with these realities, George and Tony had an advantage. Their incomes from their New York fashion businesses kept the dairy afloat at its lowest point.
If you run a farm the way we run Arethusa Farm, it would be very hard to have it look this way, to have a cattle cared for this way, and really be profitable. But we also have a second income stream to be able to do all those other things. And that's what the farmers around the country and the world don't always have.
Today, Arethusa Farm and its associated businesses are a self-sustaining network that employ over 100 people in Connecticut, an outcome that likely wouldn't have happened without the prior success of its owners. However, they emphasize that now, the quality of the products and the associated businesses really drive the farm's success.
It's really the health for the cow, and then you get such a healthy milk. It really is a standard, a great standard we have.
It's all about believing in what you're doing and standing up for that product, and whatever that is, and whether it be, a stick of butter or a pair of boots that might cost $1,500.